Hi there. I am Heather Hennessy from Heather Hennessy Life Coaching. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. This one is about uh, that working women who are new mothers want and deserve to feel better. This is a continuation of a dialogue that I really started with my video from last week. And this continuation of a discussion of what working women who are new mothers need right now. And I think that what we most need right now is to ditch the assumption that working women undergo a series of downgrades and setbacks when they become mothers. Starting from that assumption, even at the unconscious or subconscious level, undermines working women who are undergoing the transition to working motherhood in so many ways. So, um, so in my life coaching practice, Heather Hennessy Life Coaching, I focus on coaching for working women, career professionals who are either expecting their very first baby or have a baby who is under 18 months of age. And I work with you in one-on-one coaching practice online in a way that is really specifically tailored to you and in addressing the challenges that you're having in your life right that moment. So this series is really focusing on some of the themes that I see come up over and over and over again, and really what I struggled with in my own experience. So, going into today's discussion about, you know, getting rid of the old assumptions and figuring out what new assumptions we want to replace them with. Um, so, what new mothers need, I think, are available tools and resources for feeling better. But we only put those tools to good use if we adopt the assumption that new motherhood can be an amazing time for a working woman, which is the opposite of the old assumption, right? On a fundamental level, letting go of the old negative assumptions opens up room for possibilities about positive assumptions. And, it's important to take a moment and note here that I'm not talking about taking, career professional women and turning them into sort of delusional Pollyannas. But I am talking about seriously taking control of the narrative about working motherhood that's running through our brains and doing so from a place of empowerment and possibility. I believe strongly that new mothers of today will be doing themselves and their daughters a huge favor if we do this work. So last week, I covered a lot of territory in the first part of this series. If you haven't watched that video, you can certainly go back here in my feed and do so. Um, Last week, I talked about why new motherhood often feels terrible. I gave just a few examples of the mental and emotional changes that accompany new motherhood. Those changes are deeply uncomfortable, and our brains interpret that as being a problem for us. So, if you sort of read the psychology about um, emotions that are unpleasant, right? It's things like vulnerability, guilt, fear, um, you know, humiliation, um, exposure, general sort of emotional exposure, shame. And as new mothers undergoing rapid change that we're unprepared for, I think that all of those unpleasant emotions come up for people. That was certainly the case for me. So, you to kind of put a very simple label on it, those unpleasant emotions generally for me at the time just made me feel sort of terrible a lot. And I didn't know what was happening. I didn't have sort of a framework for talking about it. I wasn't prepared for it. So I just thought I felt terrible. And acknowledging that feeling terrible is actually the norm and owning it, I think, are really important first steps for people who are starting to work through this process. So, those aspects of new motherhood that cause working women to feel terrible are normal. They're a normal part of the adjustment to motherhood rather than a sign that something has really gone wrong or that we're failing. Feeling terrible is nothing to be ashamed of, nothing at all. But what often happens is that we feel terrible. We think something has gone wrong for us individually, and we get sucked into society's expectations and assumptions that working mothers collectively suffer a series of downgrades and setbacks. And then we feel shame. And then we are feeling terrible about feeling terrible. It's terrible, right? It's sort of a double whammy of terrible. And what I described, the emotions that were predominant, right? You might have another long list. Ones that I see so frequently are things like guilt, right? Especially for women who are really career professionals who have a business that's on the line, right? Realtors, small business owners, women who are extremely successful, but they've got this sense of guilt because they've got a business that relies upon them, and now they have a baby who relies upon them, and they're sort of in this tug of war. Again, that was exactly where I was during really the first year of my motherhood journey. And it felt terrible, and I felt terrible about feeling terrible. It was terrible. Um, so I was there in the early time of my motherhood pretty much constantly. Feeling terrible during the early months of motherhood is both normal and optional. And we all have the option to decide that what we really want instead is to feel better. So when I was during that phase of my life feeling terrible during those early months of new motherhood, I desperately wanted to feel better. I was on a constant search for something that could help me. And sort of looking back on that time and that search on my part is really interesting for me. Um, and I kind of come around to like, why is it that I wanted to feel better? Why do you want to feel better? Right? Like, why are you on the internet looking for ways to feel better? And, why is that something that we focus on? So several things come up and several things have emerged in my research. The first of which is that we have a human drive that is part of our hardwiring that we want to improve our lives. It is an innate urge within us to move forward, right? Like if we are feeling terrible, we try to move ourselves out of that feeling terrible and into something that, is more comfortable for us. Our brains have a drive to move us away from pain. So, sort of taking that innate urge to move out of pain and turning it into, something that's sort of a positive force for us is really one of the cornerstones of my coaching practice. I know this feeling very deeply and I am very grateful for it. That urge is really what I attribute to the entire process that I went through in the early months of my motherhood, where I was solution finding, searching out help, just looking for ways to, you know, feel better as a new mom in ways that didn't have any negative consequences for me, right? Like the first places I looked were deeply unsatisfying, right? Like sort of when you have a baby, a lot of what people want to do for you is kind of comfort that doesn't bring long-term comfort, right? Like a glass of wine or, some food, right? Like in, in my case, I was very overweight at the time. So like additional kind of comfort food, right? Like the treats and the pizzas that people wanted to bring over, right? That just wasn't actually helpful for me in the long term. And on some level, I knew that. And so I kept looking, I kept seeking out resources and solutions that were going to be helpful for me in the long term. I think that that innate drive within us is one of our most positive sort of sources of forward motion. Um, so there's also kind of this acknowledgement that motherhood in the early months is this paradox that it's both the most challenging and the most pleasurable part of my life. So I had, a decision to make. Like with that paradox, I had a decision to make and I made a decision. And I realized that looking back, I had a lot of chances to stop trying to feel better and to just go with the glass of wine or more food and just kind of going with the positive side of the paradox, right? Like when I say it was both the most challenging and the most pleasurable part of my life, right? Like being a mom was so fun. And like being with my baby brought me so much joy and so much love, right? And sort of the challenges that we faced in the early months made my marriage stronger, looking back on it, right? Like I have got this sort of picture of my husband, right? When like that we hit some curveballs, right? There were some unexpected challenges and he really stepped up to the plate, right? It's this sort of defining moment for me as a person, for my marriage, for my family that was just so wonderful. But as I said before, I also felt terrible a lot, right? And again, that's sort of this paradox between the sort of wonderful parts of new motherhood and everything just changed and I don't know how to deal with it. And like, I am, so guilty about this tug of war between like job and baby. So anyway, that paradox, I think that a lot of people sort of when they're having this twin experiences of positive and negative, and what we're kind of told is to focus on the positive, and we do, but the other side of the equation is to go to work on solving for whatever is unpleasant or negative, whatever you would label as unpleasant or negative. So we focus on the positive. Like, I love my baby so much, and this guilt must just be part of the package. Like, no, I love my baby so much that I'm going to solve for this, guilt that I feel. I'm going to solve for, the fact that I've got, weight that for me, right, I had been overweight way before the baby came. So, I'm going to start to look for solutions for me on my weight struggle. I'm going to love my baby and I'm going to go to work. And so it's a choice that I made. Again, that I am deeply grateful to myself for holding on to both sides of the paradox and, holding on to the positives and going to work on the negatives. I didn't have to do that. My clients don't have to do that, right? My clients have the choice to live with, the positives and the negatives of life. Life is always a mixture of joy and pain is part of the human experience, but going to work on the parts of it that are painful or a struggle or a challenge, that's where I think we really get some traction in turning our motherhood experience into something that's overall very, very positive for us. Um, and underlying all of that is my next point, the sort of motivation of motherhood that I I had never felt a motivational force like I felt when I looked at my baby. Like, oh, I have whatever my issue was that was, my challenge and my sort of struggle to overcome. I have so much motivation to go to work on that. And just sort of the changes in my life, changes in my relationships, changes in my health that I wanted to make, that had been with me, some of them for decades. And it was the introduction of motherhood that really got me moving. And that is invaluable. That's where a lot of my clients find themselves, is that, motherhood has sort of clicked something into gear for them where they want to make changes. They want to have a different life than they've had up to this point. And how do I do that? How do I do that? I've got to figure this out. I've got to problem solve. I have got to solution find. Again, it is motivation unlike any other. So another thing that I think kind of drives us to wanting to feel better is, for professional career women who are entering motherhood, most of us have a long, long track record of success up to the point where we become mothers, right? Like, we've got careers under our belt, we've had promotions at jobs, we've made successful, choices in our education, and whatever we've done, we've got this sort of lifespan up to that point of being successful. Along with that track record of success, frequently I see, and it was certainly the case for me, a low capacity for overcoming challenges. Because, right, I had made choices that were sort of a logical progression from one to the next, right? Like college to law school to, job to job to job to, career change, advancement. I had this track record of success, and truth be told, very little of it had really challenged me on the level that motherhood challenged me. And that kind of overcoming challenges and coping with change, it's like a muscle. It's like a muscle that you have to work out. There are people who face a lot of adversity and they are very graceful at it, right? It's like a resilience. It's this set of learned skills that we, you know, put to use throughout our lives. And when we're very good at using them, they just serve us all the time. I hadn't used those skills in years. So, successes, motherhood comes along. And I was like, oh, I am not succeeding like by my own measuring stick or, whatever. I just had this like, oh no, part of this was definitely the negative assumptions about motherhood that I had going in. But then I had this urge to get back on a path of success. That was so this sort of returning myself to the vision in my head of what success looked like and getting myself back on that successful path, very much part of my motivation to feel better. And if you're watching this, totally possible that that's part of your motivation to feel better. That success as my norm, I wanted to get back to that in a big way. And so, closely related to that is my next point. I think that one of the many reasons that motherhood can be challenging for working women who are older, I was 41 when I became a mom, is that we're out of practice at change. Change is adjusting to change. Resilience in the face of change is another one of those skill sets that I was very, very not practiced at the time. So you got this massive change. Literally everything changes when you become a mom, in my experience. And I just was totally rusty at coping with change. Or I was really good at navigating the changes that I had chosen, and I was choosing changes that were within my comfort zone. So, motherhood and the changes that came with it, a lot of them were outside of my comfort zone. So, being practiced at change as women who are, maybe you're in your later 30s or in your 40s when you're becoming a mother for the first time, you have a ton of life experience. And the downside of having mastered so much of what you're doing in life is that you don't have that assumption of adaptability. So, you've mastered your career, right? You've got the house, you're very settled probably in many ways. You have this sort of level of mastery of your existence. And then motherhood comes along and all of that goes out the window. So, sort of the last couple of things on my list here, we are motivated to feel better in part by just the sort of healthy striving, right? Which is a very good thing. And it's a positive force for change in our lives. This is, I just want to feel better and I am striving to feel better. um, it is a privilege that we actually have to take a challenge and turn it into an opportunity. Um, that is something that, as human beings, is available to us if we want to take advantage of it. And I absolutely encourage my clients to take advantage of that opportunity. When a challenge arises, we have the ability to use it as, there are things here I need to learn, right? I need to re figure out how to re-engage all of my muscles for adaptability, flexibility, and coping with change, right? And then you sort of work on that skill set, and then, that benefits you in other parts of your lives. Um, so that's the sort of like variety of positive places that you could be coming from as you are searching out ways to feel better as a new mom. Now we want to talk about a couple of the things that are very, very prevalent and really present us with the sort of negative side of that motivation to change. So I cannot remember a time in my life where I didn't have a long list of shoulds in my head. Like, I should lose weight. I should work harder. I should, you know, um, whatever, like insert decision of my life. I had this sort of running mental chatter of a long list of shoulds. I was shoulding on myself. And that those are usually present for us when we're doing the opposite thing. Like, I should be eating, a salad, but instead I'm going to have, whatever I was eating at the moment. I should, check my emails, but instead I'm going to watch Netflix, right? Or, I should do some task for a client, but instead I'm going to watch Netflix, right? Like, we set up this dialogue of shoulds. This is, you read about this in a variety of places, but it sets up an internal tension within us where we're telling ourselves we should be doing something, and we're there, purposefully, simultaneously choosing not to do it. It sort of sets up this internal tension, and it undermines our sort of integrity with ourselves and our, you know, belief in ourselves. So the shoulding on ourselves is just not a force for positive change. It never worked for me, ever. So, the letting go of the shoulds and sort of refocusing on some of those things earlier in my list, right? Like the motivation that came with motherhood and sort of some of those things. This is really, important shift. It's very subtle internal shift, but it's an important one. The other thing that was undermining me during my early months as a mom, and that I see so often, is this really negative belief that the only way to motivate ourselves is to beat ourselves up and feel terrible, right? Like I'm not working hard enough, so I'm going to beat myself up for not working hard enough so that I'll go work harder. It's not true. Like, all the research, all the sort of neuroscience behind it, not only was it never true for me on a practical level, I now know through my coaching training and everything that I've done sort of in the past couple of years, it just never works. It might work in the short term. Like I maybe could have been, hard on myself enough to lose some weight, over time, or go to the gym for a couple of weeks, but it just wasn't sustainable. I was being so hard on myself and I was being so, mean to myself that it just was totally unsustainable. Like the carrying the extra weight was less painful than my dialogue that I was having with myself and, being mean to myself. So that negative motivation, it's the opposite of healthy striving, right? It's the opposite of sort of taking your new motivations as a new mom and turning them into sources of inspiration for change. That these negative kind of motivators are just not getting us anywhere. So now that you have this framework, check in with yourself. If you are on, a search for how to feel better as a new mom, what's behind your search? And excuse me, it might be a couple of these things are at play at the same time. Like I said, new motherhood is a paradox. So you may have some bundle of these going on at the same time. And, as we're talking it through here, this might give you some clarity. And, what you can do on your own is really take some of this framework, bring some awareness to how are you talking to yourself? What are you telling yourself? How are you treating yourself mentally and emotionally? And if you are using some of those negative motivators, kind of, work on dialing down those voices. And again, you can do that on your own, without a coach. Coaching is a great place to practice some of that and to really figure out the macro level skill set. And my work is devoted to getting my clients into that sort of positive, sustainable, and adaptable and flexible kind of part of their internal motivation, right? Because if you live there and stay there, you become unstoppable. If you're beating yourself up, maybe excuse me, maybe some short-term results, but certainly not a place to find your lasting change. In the positive side of the house, you get so much more lasting change. And doing some of this work during your early months of motherhood totally pays off for the rest of your time as a parent, right? Like you get the opportunity that new motherhood affords you to do some work that then pays off for the rest of your lifetime. So my work and my coaching practice is devoted to helping women, working women who are new mothers, make this adjustment gracefully and intentionally, which frequently produces, as a side benefit, the result of just feeling better. It puts us back in control of our experience in really meaningful and impactful ways. There's so much to be said for using the opportunity that motherhood offers us as a jumping off point for making positive change in our lives. So if this is you, if you are a working woman who is a brand new mom, or who is expecting her first baby, I would be honored and thrilled to be part of your motherhood journey. My coaching practice is currently accepting new one-on-one clients. You can find information about how to work with me on my website, which is heatherhennessy.com. It has been my pleasure speaking with you today. Thanks so much for tuning in.